Somewhere in the deserts of Sudan sit more than 200 pyramids. That's more than Egypt has left standing today. And most people watching this right now have never heard of a single one. Welcome to Meroe, capital of the Kingdom of Kush. Not a footnote to Egypt, not a smaller cousin. For nearly a century, Kushite pharaohs ruled over Egypt itself as the 25th dynasty, conquerors from the south sitting on Egypt's own throne. And after Egypt eventually fell under foreign control, Kush didn't collapse with it. It simply moved its capital south, to Meroe, and kept building for another 600 years. Which raises an obvious question. If this kingdom conquered Egypt and outlasted it by centuries, why has almost nobody heard of it? The pyramids themselves are the first clue that something has been left out of the story. Look closely, and they're not smaller, cheaper versions of Egypt's. They're steeper, narrower at the base, a completely different architectural language, built for different stone, different terrain, and a different relationship between the living and the dead. This wasn't imitation. This was evolution. For much of the last 200 years, many early European scholars didn't see it that way. The assumption built into early scholarship was simple and ultimately incorrect. An African kingdom couldn't have reached this level of achievement without Egypt doing the heavy lifting. Kush was often treated as a copy rather than a civilization in its own right. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. That assumption didn't just remain in old books. It had consequences you can still see today. In the 1830s, an Italian explorer named Giuseppe Ferlini went looking for treasure inside these pyramids. He didn't believe local accounts that Kushite royals were buried with elaborate gold. When he found it, and he did find it, his response wasn't careful excavation. It was demolition. He blasted the tops off dozens of pyramids to reach the burial chambers faster, destroying monuments that had stood for nearly 2,000 years in just a matter of weeks. That's not ancient erasure. That's colonial-era destruction. And the story gets even stranger. Meroe wasn't just a royal cemetery. It was one of the ancient world's major centers of iron production. Massive slag heaps and the remains of ancient furnaces still surround the city today, evidence of large-scale ironworking that supplied tools and weapons across the region for centuries. An empire this technologically advanced, and most people couldn't point to it on a map. Then there's the writing. The Kushites developed their own script, Meroitic, distinct from Egyptian hieroglyphs. Today, researchers can read the symbols and understand how many of the words were pronounced, but much of the language itself remains undeciphered. Entire inscriptions carved into stone are still waiting to reveal exactly what they say. Not lost, not destroyed. Simply unread. And one more detail rarely makes it into popular history. Several of Meroe's most powerful rulers were women. The Kandakes, warrior queens who ruled in their own right, commanded armies, and shaped the kingdom's future. Ancient sources describe one Kandake, commonly identified as Amani-Renas, leading Kushite forces against Rome. The conflict eventually ended in a peace agreement that proved remarkably favorable to Kush. A kingdom that conquered Egypt, an industrial iron economy, a writing system that still guards many of its secrets, warrior queens who challenged one of history's greatest empires. That isn't a forgotten footnote. It's one of the ancient world's great civilizations. Kush was influenced by Egypt, but it was never simply a copy. It developed its own monuments, its own industries, its own writing system, and its own identity. The reason you've probably never heard this story isn't because the evidence doesn't exist. The pyramids are still standing. The inscriptions are still carved into stone. The archaeological record is still there. What disappeared was the attention. More than 200 pyramids. A kingdom that once ruled Egypt. A script that still refuses to surrender all of its secrets. And a civilization that deserves to stand alongside the greatest of the ancient world. Perhaps the greatest mystery of Meroe isn't how it rose. It's how so many people forgot it ever existed. If Meroe surprised you, you'll want to see the incredible story of Great Zimbabwe, a civilization so advanced that many refuse to believe Africans built it. Click the video on your screen now.